Imagine starting your day not with a gentle alarm, but with the chilling knowledge that if you don't get out of bed in the pitch black cold, nobody in your large family eats. That's the reality we're exploring today. A day in the life of a farmer's wife in 1950s rural America. A life where basic comforts like hot water and refrigeration simply didn't exist in the way we understand them. James, this wasn't the romanticized image of a woman in a polka dot apron, was it? It sounds like an unrelenting physical and mental marathon from pre-dawn until well after sunset.
It was absolutely a marathon, Lily. This wasn't about charm, it was about sheer survival and an incredible amount of labor. Forget the soft modern start to the day. For a 1950s farmer's wife, the day began in the dark, usually before the rooster even thought about crowing. There was no snooze button. There was only the cold and the immediate, pressing tasks that had to be done. Her husband might still be snoring peacefully beside her, but her day had started hours before his would.
So even the rooster is a lazy amateur compared to her schedule. It paints a picture of constant vigilance. You describe this true morning alarm as the small, involuntary gasp she lets out as she swings her legs into the freezing air. It's a shocking image of an everyday experience.
That gasp was universal. No amount of years on the farm made that first shock of cold floor against bare feet feel welcome. It was like stepping into a lake at dawn, but it was your own bedroom. She dressed quickly, in the dark, because oil for a lamp was a precious resource. Her clothes were laid out from the night before, a pure practicality. In about 90 seconds, she transformed into the fully operational engine of that household. There was no coffee first, no quiet moment. The moment her feet hit the floor, she was on the clock, and that clock was merciless.
It's a stark contrast to our sunrise alarms that gently glow. She had the original model, as you put it, which involved responsibilities and hungry people. And I imagine the first hurdle after getting out of bed was just surviving the temperature of her own home.
Precisely. Central heating was a rumor from the city. The farmhouse held warmth about as well as a screen door. Floorboards were cold enough to store meat, and her breath hung in the air. This wasn't a polite, distant cold. It was personal. It seeped up through the floorboards. On truly bitter mornings, you could see frost on the inside of the glass. For a modern person, the closest comparison would be a power outage in the dead of winter, but for her, this wasn't an emergency. This was every single day until spring.
And she was the one who fixed it with wood, fire, and stubbornness. So the first crucial task was always the cook stove, which you describe as the true ruler of the household. It sounds less like an appliance and more like a temperamental beast.
It was enormous, made of enough iron to sink a boat, and it demanded to be fed before anyone else. There was no dial for 350 degrees. It was all feel, guesswork, and experience. The first task was always clearing yesterday's ashes, a dusty chore. Then she'd build the fire fresh, laying kindling just so, like an architect. That match catching, the paper flaring, feeding the flame with tenderness, it was a relationship built on attention. Too little wood, it sputtered out. Too much, too fast, it smothered. When it roared to life, there was a small flush of victory.
So heat control was an art form, really. It sounds like a skill that's completely lost to us, where we just set a dial and walk away. She's reading this stove like a book, knowing which part runs hotter, how to use the damper, testing the oven with her hand or a pinch of flour. It's truly incredible.
It was. This stove was literally the heart of the home, heating the kitchen and water, cooking every meal. It never fully went out during winter. It was banked low overnight and revived at dawn. Her job was to keep the fire of the household alive. By the time the family wandered in, the kitchen would be glowing and warm, seemingly effortless. They'd never see the ashes on her hands or the smoke in her eyes. That was just part of the job she arranged to be invisible.
And after fire comes water. And you emphasize that water did not come to her. She had to go to it, often in the dark and cold. We complain about our ice makers being slow, but she was hauling every drop the family would use.
Every single drop. The pump handle was cold enough to sting. She'd work it up and down until water gushed into the bucket. And then the real cost. Water is astonishingly heavy. A full bucket in each hand turned a simple walk back to the house into a slow, careful, arm-stretching trudge. Cooking, washing, drinking, it all added up to staggering amounts of water, gallon by gallon, hauled by her own two arms. There was no invisible river behind the walls, only the pump, the bucket, the distance, and her aching back.
Wash day must have been a truly epic event, and bath night. Heating pot after pot of water, all personally carried, just so the family could get clean. There's almost a meditative quality to it, this endless carrying of water, but it's also just an immense burden.
It's one of the oldest human tasks there is, and in winter, it took on an extra layer of misery with icy ground and stubborn pumps. She learned to watch her footing because slipping with 2 full buckets was a disaster nobody had time for. Yet she went because coffee didn't brew itself, and the family would be up soon. When that coffee was finally poured, it tasted thoroughly earned.
And the plumbing situation, or rather, the complete lack of it, the outhouse. We take indoor plumbing for granted, but for many, it was a brisk walk from the back door, come rain or shine, summer heat, or winter freeze.
In summer, it was fragrant and shared with flies. In winter, it was a test of commitment to being alive. You did your business quickly, with no lingering. The outhouse was carefully distanced to theoretically keep its aroma separate, but that theory often fell apart. Winter presented its own cruelty, a frigid dash across the dark yard, the wooden seat exposed to the night air, making you question every decision that led you there. And for nighttime emergencies, the chamber pot, discreetly kept under the bed. Guess who emptied it each morning? Her. Another small, unglamorous task.
So after all that, the cows still have needs, and they're loud about it. She's out to the barn before dawn, milking by hand. This isn't just feeding the family, it's an intimate, physically demanding interaction with a large animal.
Absolutely. Stool in one hand, bucket in the other. Pressing her forehead against a warm flank, squeezing breakfast out. Her fingers cramped, her arms burned. The cow might even relocate a hoof into the bucket. There was no machine. Only her, the cow, and a partnership neither of them exactly volunteered for. The barn was warm with animal heat, thick with the smell of hay and manure. She'd settle on the low stool, beginning the steady rhythmic work her hands knew by heart. Squeeze and pull, the milk hissing into the pail.
And the cows, like everything else, don't have a snooze button either. An unmilked cow is a distressed cow, and the milk won't wait for a headache or a sick child. Twice a day, without exception, unpaid, unthanked labor.
That's right. There's a quiet strength in the barn at dawn, leaning against the warm cow, listening to the milk. It's not rest, but it's close enough. Then the buckets are full and heavy, and she carries them back, where the milk becomes cream, butter, and countless other things. Someday, milk would just appear in cartons, but her forearms would never let her forget the work. Next, it was off to the hen house.
Ah, the hen house. Another place where the picturesque image probably falls short of the reality. Small, feathered dinosaurs with opinions and sharp beaks, guarding their eggs like crown jewels.
Exactly. The hen house was a wall of warm, pungent air and a chorus of clucking. Her job was to slide a hand under each hen and retrieve eggs without losing a finger. Some hens accepted it, others saw it as a personal violation. You developed a smooth technique, hesitate, and you were doomed. And then there was the rooster.
The rooster, the self-appointed king of the farmyard, charging at her ankles, making her dance to avoid getting spurred. It hardly sounds like a quaint country tableau.
It was considerably more attitude and low-grade violence. She kept a stick handy, not proudly, but practically. These eggs were more than just breakfast. The extras became valuable income, often her own. And that changed everything about how she regarded those ill-tempered birds.
Back inside, the real cooking began. This wasn't a granola bar on the go. This was a feast designed to fuel men doing incredibly hard labor. Breakfast was enormous. Eggs, biscuits, gravy, meat, fried potatoes, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in.
It was provisioning and expedition. The biscuits alone were a feat of engineering in that unpredictable oven. Gravy simmering, eggs frying, potatoes crisping, meat sizzling. She managed it all at once, a conductor of a very greasy orchestra. No keeping warm button, no microwave. She choreographed the whole performance in her head. She was the owner, the dishwasher, the one who raised the chickens, and the one who would clean up the mess afterward. Her customers didn't pay, didn't tip, and would be back at noon expecting an even bigger meal.
The least appreciated restaurant in America, and if there were hired hands during busy seasons, her labor doubled overnight with no extra help in the kitchen because those hands were in the field, creating the need for more food.
The arithmetic was staggering. A family of 8 plus 3 or 4 working men for every meal. Word traveled fast, and a wife known for a poor table brought shame, so she cooked, generously, whatever the strain. There was a strange satisfaction in the exhaustion, though. A well-fed crew worked harder, and grateful men clearing their plates was its own reward.
But every glorious meal had a dark side, the towering stack of dirty dishes. No dishwasher, just a basin, carried and heated water, harsh soap, and already tired hands. And it wasn't even 7 in the morning.
The dishes were the quiet tax on every meal. Greasy pans, bacon fat, dried gravy, all required real scrubbing with lye soap that left hands red and rough. And the maddening part, by the time she finished, wiped down the table, and swept, the noon meal was already looming. She'd dirty every one of those dishes again in a matter of hours. The cycle never reached a point where the dishes were simply, permanently done. Nobody noticed clean plates, only dirty ones. But she noticed in her own way that the kitchen was in order and the family was fed.
This brings us to wash day, which you say wasn't just a day, but a battle. It's an all-day, full-body ordeal. We talk about washing machines now as simple conveniences, but hers was her own body, and it didn't have a spin cycle she could ignore.
Exactly. It began with an enormous amount of water, more than any other task. Every gallon had to be pumped, carried, heated, then sorting, soaking, scrubbing on a washboard until knuckles were raw. After scrubbing came rinsing, then wringing, twisting each heavy soaked garment by hand. Her forearms burned. A large wet item like overalls felt like a drowned cat. If she had a wringer washer, that was a machine that both helped and actively tried to hurt her. It was a miracle until it grabbed your sleeve, then your hand pulling you in like an octopus with a grudge.
So progress came with fine print, with stories of crushed fingers and mangled arms. You thank the machine, you respect it, but you never, ever trust it. And then, once it's all washed, it still needs to dry, and there's no electric dryer, just a clothesline and the unpredictable sky.
On a good day, the breeze did the work and the sheets smelled like heaven. On a bad day, the rain arrived the moment everything was hung or the wind stole a shirt. In winter, clothes froze solid and she carried in stiff, board-flat trousers. Rain was the great enemy. The clothesline tied her to the sky. She watched the clouds and planned her entire wash day around the weather. And when it was dry, it had to be ironed. The standards were frankly unhinged.
Unhinged. What does that mean for ironing in the 1950s farmhouse?
Sheets, shirts, aprons, dish towels, even undergarments, all got pressed flat with an iron heated on the stove. She'd test the temperature near her cheek, hoping it was just right. Burn the shirt, and it was more work. Do it perfectly, and no one noticed because a perfectly ironed pillowcase was simply expected. The iron was a heavy wedge of metal heated directly on the cook stove. Judging its temperature was a skill born of experience and many ruined garments. Perfection went unremarked, invisible until absent.
And she didn't just cook food, she grew a heroic amount of it. The kitchen garden sounds like both her kingdom and her prison.
It was. She'd plant, weed, water, battling bugs, rabbits, and a merciless sun, all bent over in the dirt with dinner still to make. This garden fed the family through winter, so failure wasn't an option. It was the original farm to table, but she was the farm, the table, and the exhausted person in between. The war on weeds began almost immediately. The garden also brought enemies, rabbits, beetles, birds, and the water for it meant hauling bucket after bucket from the pump, the same heavy work she knew so well. In a drought, a failed garden was a genuine threat to her family's food supply.
So, whatever the garden gave her, she had to save. Which brings us to canning season, a summer ritual of standing over boiling water in an already sweltering kitchen. Pinterest might call it wellness, but she called it Tuesday.
It was hot, endless, and the genuine difference between eating and not eating in January. She'd fill jar after jar, hundreds of them, with vegetables and fruit. There was skill and real danger in it, too. Canning done wrong could make people gravely ill. A jar that failed to seal, a batch improperly processed, could spoil. So she was meticulous, checking each seal, because this food was for her children in the dead of winter. But when it was done, there was deep satisfaction in surveying those laden cellar shelves, row upon row of glass jars, all put up by her own hands. That cellar was her family's security, built in sweat and steam.
And storing all that food? Without guaranteed refrigeration, she relied on the root cellar, a cool, dark hole underground. Not a set-it-and-forget-it kind of storage, I imagine.
No, stored produce had to be checked constantly. One rotting potato could spoil the whole bin. Milk stayed cool in spring water. Meat was salted or smoked. Everything was watched like a hawk for the first hint of rot. Losing food meant losing weeks of her own sweat. There was no ordering takeout when the potatoes turned.
Let's not forget the butter. All that milk she squeezed at dawn. It didn't just become butter magically, did it?
Not at all. She'd skim the cream, pour it into the churn, and begin the ancient exercise of moving a stick up and down for what felt like forever. Her arm would go numb, then sore, then philosophical. Eventually, the cream would turn to butter, and she'd feel a flicker of triumph, only to remember she'd be doing it again in a couple of days, forever. And bread was another endless task. No bakery down the street, so she was the bakery, kneading dough, waiting for it to rise, punching it down, all while juggling 9 other tasks.
And her wardrobe? I found it fascinating that flour and feed sacks, printed with cheerful patterns, became dresses, aprons, and dish towels. It's incredibly thrifty, but also a little heartbreaking.
It was. Companies knew exactly what they were doing. She'd save them, match patterns, sewing clothing for the whole family out of what was technically chicken feed packaging. Fashion was measured by how many matching sacks she could collect. And for entertainment, when the workday finally slowed, there was the catalog.
The catalog, a thick, glossy book of everything she couldn't quite afford. It sounds like a blend of shopping, entertainment, and daydreaming, a paper doorway to a softer life, as you put it.
It was her version of scrolling phones at midnight, a washing machine that didn't try to eat you, a refrigerator, a dress she didn't have to sew from feed sacks. She might not order much, but she looked, imagined, and for a few quiet minutes found escape.
And if they had a telephone, it was often a party line, shared with neighbors, where gossip traveled faster than any illness.
You didn't get your own private connection. You got a shared one with a specific ring pattern and the constant knowledge that anyone could pick up and listen. You learned to speak in code, to keep secrets off the phone, and to recognize the telltale click of Edna, 2 farms over. Then there was the constant battle against dirt. The mud, the men, the animals, the stove puffing soot. This house got dirty faster than she could possibly clean it.
But clean it she did, on her hands and knees. Housekeeping as an act of endurance, a war against dust she couldn't win, but wasn't allowed to lose. And the day's biggest meal, called dinner, was at noon, not in the evening.
Right. The men came in from the fields ravenous, expecting meat, potatoes, vegetables, bread, and pie. Her entire morning built toward this feast, which she cooked, served, and cleaned up after, only to immediately start thinking about supper. The kitchen was a full-time second job.
But she did have a small pocket of power, the egg money. The extras from those chickens she fought became her own personal income, a modest bit of cash that bought fabric or shoes for the children, or a treat from that catalog.
In a world where her husband controlled the farm's finances, that egg money was quietly precious, a hard-earned bit of independence. And then there was community. Sunday church was the social center, a full performance review for her family, children behaving, potluck dish good, everyone respectable. There was warmth and support, but also an unspoken standard she was expected to meet.
And the sheer scale of raising a family. Children arrived often, adding childcare to an already impossibly full day. The work never paused for anyone, not even a newborn.
Each child was a joy and, practically, a future pair of hands the farm would need. She nursed, soothed, taught, and folded childcare into her day. Sickness was a real danger, too. Help was far off. The doctor might be miles away, and a phone call wasn't always an option. She became the family nurse, armed with home remedies and hope, sitting up through worried nights, all while keeping the household running. And when she herself fell ill, the cows still needed milking, and the men still needed feeding. She'd tie on her apron and push through, because rest was a luxury for other people.
It's a truly humbling portrait of a single day in the life of a 1950s farmer's wife. From that freezing step onto the cold floorboards to the weary collapse into bed, hours after the sun went down, she hauled water, fed fires, milked cows, fought chickens, cooked enormous meals, washed mountains of dishes, scrubbed, canned, churned, sewed, mended, nursed the sick, raised children, and fed crews. And through it all, she kept the quiet machine of the household running without ever once being allowed to stop. There were no weekends, no vacations, no moment where the work was simply finished.
Only the next task and the certainty that tomorrow it would all begin again. Yet through that exhaustion and isolation, these women found room for laughter, for the warmth of community, for pride in a full cellar, a well-kept home, and a family that wanted for nothing they could give. Every easy comfort we take for granted now, water arriving, food staying cold, clothes washing themselves, warmth at the turn of a dial, was once a task these women did by hand, over and over, without rest or applause.
Their strength holds up more of our world than we will ever fully know. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might appreciate learning about this incredible history.